We'll be starting in about 5 minutes. Yeah, just about 5 or so minutes here. If anyone has any questions, field them in the Q&A panel. I'd love to answer anyone's questions that they have. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what we plan to discuss today, which I think is actually extremely practical, very useful, and it will offer a really nice primer for Alec Watson's exclusive workshops this month as well. So if you're participating in those exclusive workshops, this is a really useful sort of tip to start some of the stuff content that he's going to be talking about in his compositions workshops. And just a reminder too that my next workshop is going to be on it's actually going to be on printing. So we're going to talk about basically bleed and other sort of print related concerns, which again is a very practical workshop. And I'm excited to be talking about that, as I do have a background in graphic design, and I am a graphic designer, and those printing aspects are really useful, especially if you're going to be going through proper or professional print shops. So if you want to see Alec's workshop or my workshop, that is this month and next month, subscribe to our premium plan. Gives you access to 3 exclusive workshops a month, and then also gives you access to a bunch of other courses that Alec Watson has done in the past. Yeah. Okay. So like I said, we'll get started shortly here, and we'll talk about PNGs and transparencies. Yeah. For those of you that are participating in this workshop, how many of you are familiar with layered editing? Because this transparencies do involve layered editing. I would just like to get a familiar or unfamiliar. Thank you, Sven. Sounds like a couple of you are. Also, I apologize. I'm a bit feeling a bit under the weather, so forgive my sniffles that may occur. So and unfamiliar, good. This is going to be good for you, Colleen and Randy. Marv, John, this is going to be a little bit of sort of introducing elements you might already understand, but probably expanding upon those. Manfred, Sonia, unfamiliar, great. That's what we want. Layers, use them all the time. Awesome. Unfamiliar, good. Okay, cool. So there's I think this is a perfect topic for a one of our free workshops too, because it introduces some sort of beginner to intermediate skill sets. Excellent. Yeah, still coming in. Unfamiliar, familiar. Great. So we have like a pretty mixed crew of people that are familiar with them, which is to be expected, I think. I'm seeing some familiar names here as well. Awesome. So, like I said, I am a graphic designer, and one of the things that I did prior to working with ACDSee was I worked as a lead graphic designer for like a print shop, and did that for 4 or 5 years. And one of the things that's very important to understand about PNGs and transparencies more broadly is, and this is going to be something that we'll cover too, and I kind of want to talk about this as we go through. So we're going to be talking about today, okay, first of all, what is a transparency? So understanding how to make them, that sort of thing. Sort of what files do contain transparencies. There's only a couple, so it's worth noting. And then we're going to go through the process of actually creating a sort of a composition based on the use of transparencies. Now, one of the things that's really cool to know, I guess, at least from a standpoint of working as a designer, is what we do is I'd often do brochures and posters and all these different types of print media for companies, right? I worked with lots of restaurants. I worked with lots of clothing companies. I worked with sort of small boutique shops in the city in which I live. All of these had print materials. And one of the very common issues that I came across over and over and over again was explaining the significance of a PNG or a transparency. And the reason for this is because many people wanted to put their logos or logos of people that are helping them with a project or organization. They wanted to put other people's logos on their media. Now, this does relate to photography more broadly, but when it comes to a brochure and you're like, hey, we're an organization and these are our partners, and then the person who's in charge of their PR group or their marketers are sending me files that are not PNGs, that causes a real issue. And a good way to understand this, let's just create a quick blank file so everyone can see what I mean. Let's just make a quick 4,000 by 4,000. And let's not for this use a transparent background. Let's set a black background. So I'll show you what I mean really quickly. So if I open up this file, I've just created a file really quickly. And what would happen is people would send me JPEGs when they meant to send PNGs. So a JPEG is going to look different than a PNG because JPEGs do not preserve transparency. PNGs do preserve transparency. So when you send someone a JPEG, for example, and their brochure is all nicely designed and has beautiful color on it, and text and all these things, and even photographs and such. And at the bottom, they want you to put a logo of one of their partners, and then they send you this. And so what happens is, the problem being here is that this Plymouth logo of a, Plymouth being a car company in this case, now no longer exists. But the issue here is that there's this white boundary that occurs on the edges of that logo. Versus if I put on a PNG file, you can see that this logo does not have a white boundary around the edge of it. And in fact, actually, if we change the background color altogether, you can see the difference really clearly. Let's change this to red, and then I'll fill that layer. So right away, you can see the difference between the two. And when you're working with a file that has beautiful color or photos, and with the intent of putting objects over top of that space, whether it be a photograph of someone, or whether it be, which we'll be talking about today, or in the case of something very practical like a logo, PNGs are preferred. And the reason why they're preferred is because that they don't have this white background that appears right to the left of it. Now, there's other considerations to be made when it comes to print media and sending someone an actual sort of a print sized file, like a PDF or an SVG or EPS file or something like that. But that's sort of beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. Really, the point being is that PNGs preserve transparency, whereas JPEGs don't preserve transparency, and that's going to affect your file. Now, there obviously are considerations, like if this background was in fact just white, then there would be no difference between the two of these. But in like 80 to 90% of print-related jobs or jobs with your clients, that's not going to be the case. And in fact, the background in these spaces is going to be designed and is going to have content. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. This is like sort of a really rudimentary primer to what we're talking about here. But Keith had lived it. Have you lived it in the sense that you've worked with designers, or you've maybe seen some of your own work? The real problem that we came across is when I was working with so you'd work with a society, right? And they'd send you the wrong file. Totally what happens. And this is due not to anyone being this isn't due to the fact that these companies or organizations or whoever don't have the correct files. They probably do have the correct files because they had them designed through a designer. One of the issues is a lack of sort of education, or maybe a lack of a sort of awareness of the actual files that they should be using. And so the real benefit of this, besides it being a workshop on how to sort of make transparencies, is that this is going to give you the tools to actually have a degree of knowledge when it comes to very practical things. Practical stuff when it comes to working with print shops, practical stuff when it comes to working with designers, and more broadly, if any of you have a company, right? And you're going to be working with a designer at some point, or working with somebody who's representing your company, this is really critical information to know. So CBP asked, is PNG background transparent by default? Well, basically that's what we're going to be talking about today. Yes and no. PNGs are backgrounds are transparent by default, provided that there's no content there. And so what the examples that we're going to be providing today change the content. So in this example, CBP with this Plymouth logo, the PNG on the right, you can see that there is no content in the space that exceeds the actual pixels of the logo itself. And the space that doesn't have any pixels associated with it exists as a transparency. Now that state of the everything that is outside of the pixels that actually have qualities, like in this case, black being 0 and white being 100 or whatever, or 255, that is a transparency. So PNGs will understand that background as not containing information. So the answer to your question is soft, yes. In this case, hopefully that answers your question. Anyway, so we'll answer that in a bit more content now. Okay, so let's get out of here and let's move to something a bit more relevant. So let's open up a different file. I have this file right here, and we're going to talk about it and talking about the process of a transparency. So we're going to create a transparency with this gentleman. We're going to remove the background. Pretty simple. There is a minimal way to do that, and then there is a maximal way to do that, which is preferred. Minimally erasing, and I really mean erasing, using the eraser in this case, minimally using the eraser will produce a situation with a transparency. So if I just use the eraser right here, hopefully everyone can see that checkerboard that appears to the right. That checkerboard is ACDSee's way of telling us that those squares contain no pixel information, meaning that information is blank. Now, given the circumstances right now, given the fact that I've just made an eraser action on the right of this image here, just given what you know based on what we saw about the PNGs, if I was to save this as a JPEG, what would be the background color that ACDSee would choose to represent this transparent part? Yes. Yeah, totally. So this would be, when saved as a JPEG, replaced with white, which is a choice that the JPEG, that's sort of a coded element of what the JPEG understands, right? Now, when I save this as a PNG, that does not contain white as a replacement color. It is now treated as there is no pixel information whatsoever. So there is a difference between transparencies in terms of JPEGs and PNGs. JPEGs will always replace that content with white, provided that there isn't a pixel there already. So the left side of this image would not be replaced with white. Obviously, that would be silly. That's not what the JPEG's for. It contains pixel information, therefore it will preserve it. It is spaces in which it does not contain pixel information that it will be forced to replace it with white. Okay, So Rick asked, how do you get the checkerboard rather than a selected color? So if you were to just use the brush tool, for example, the brush tool would replace a space, an area on your image with white, right? So a brush is a different tool than erase, which in this case erases pixel content. Do you see the difference between those two things, Rick? And that so eraser is to remove the pixel content. Anything that it sees, it's going to do its best to remove them. And brush is going to replace or put over top a pixel, in this case, the pixel of whatever your foreground color is. Rick, does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Okay, I'm going to navigate away from this. So the point of that illustration was one thing. Minimally, if I erase my image and save it as a PNG, that part of my image that I erased is going to be transparent. Minimally, if I erase my image and I erase a part of my image and I save that image as a JPEG, it will be represented in white. He says, or Kai, sorry, background is information, erase removes information. Yeah, so in an image, I mean, we're sort of calling this a background. In the case of our image here, there's a couple things that can be considered a background. An image that is the lowest on our layer order. So if there's images that appear above this on the layer order, then maybe the image that appears on the bottom would be called a background image. And then in regards to this particular image, there's the background in our image, which is the space that exists behind the subject. So erasing the background of our image in the sense that the space behind our subject will then be replaced with a transparency. It removes pixel information. A transparency is the lack of pixel information. Okay, so let's translate this in a different way so everybody can maybe understand it differently. Let's do this. Let's discard this here. Let's do new image. We'll do 4000. We will do a transparency. There we go. Oh yeah, let's replace it. That's fine. Okay, so here is a blank image. And by the basis of it being covered in a checkerboard, we know one thing about this image. We know that it is empty, okay? So if I was to save this as a PNG, this would be a completely transparent image that contained no content whatsoever. And in essence, it would be sort of like a ghost image. However, if we were to draw on this to add content to this in a way, so we'll do that. What we can do is we'll just go ahead and we will add a color really quickly. We'll just add blue. So I'm just going to draw a blue circle in the center of my image here. Now, if we save this as a PNG, what's going to be represented in the PNG will be a blue circle. What will also be represented is the dimensions of the image. And then thirdly, what will be represented is the transparency or the basically missing pixel information in the space around it. I'm just going to save this really quickly as an ACDSee file so I can keep working on it in a second here. Let's just go example. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to then save this as a PNG. So I'll navigate to File, Save As. I'm just going to save it as a PNG. And I'll call it example PNG. And that way, when we go to open up a separate image, I can show you. Here's our example ACDSee file. So this is our editable file right here. And then this is our PNG example. So if I was to go into any image here, it doesn't matter. I'll just go into my AI actions image here. I'll edit that. You can see my image right here. Now, when I go to click on the add file as a layer, which is just located right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this blue dot that I've just created. So here's my PNG file. This is the example file right here. If I hover over it, it tells me it's a PNG image. If I go down to format right here, it tells me it's a PNG image. And there you have it. If I add my PNG on my image, it is represented by the transparency that exists that surrounds it, right? So it only contains the actual information, the pixel information that is blue in this case. So Rick asks, the checkerboard represents transparency, yet in Ultimate 2023 support says it can't be done. We must. I'm not certain about what you mean in this case, Rick. You can email me though. I can find more information in regards to this. Now, so we have removed the blue circle, we've created the blue circle as a PNG image and then placed it over top of my image in this case. And hopefully what this does is it showcases to you the difference between a PNG and again, a JPEG more broadly. So if we were to go into our ACDSee file that we have back here, the one that we created, the one that has this editable file, for example, and we were to save this as a JPEG, saving this as a JPEG is going to result in that being supplanted with a transparency. Let's do that. You can see that when I go to save the file itself, the actual JPEG removes, the process of saving the file actually does remove the transparency that's presented here. So once again, if we go back to our AI actions image, just like we had earlier, and we go ahead and we place the example that's a PNG, or sorry, a JPEG over top of it, yeah, it's going to contain all of the information that was presented to us earlier, in this case, the white square. Okay, so let's go back to our subject here, talk a little bit more about that. So what have we talked about so far? So the first thing that we identified is just common use scenarios. For example, being a very, very, very common use scenario is just sending the wrong logo, right? Then we've sort of isolated too, like visually what the differences are between the two. So, and how they affect ACDSee in a direct way, and just also how they affect, if you were to send a PNG, that's just universally how PNGs appear to other users, provided that they're opening them up in some form of editor, okay? Or they're placing them over top of content. So then we also just briefly touched on sort of minimally erasing parts of our image results in a PNG. And now we're going to talk about the actual method that we intend to use in a more general sense, which is masking our images. So minimally we can erase, and then in an actual sense, masking our image is what we really want to do. So masking an image is the process of essentially telling ACDSee what parts of our image we want to display and what parts of our image we want to make transparent or hide. There's several ways of making a mask. For one, what we can do is we can add a mask to our image. So I can navigate to mask underneath the adjustment layers. And by the process of adding a mask, I will receive a white box that appears to the right of our image. This white box is very important and contains very, very, very important image about our very important information about our image. Masks tell us the following. They tell us that parts of our images are turned off or turned on depending on whether or not they are black or white. So in our image here, we have a white square to the right of my image here. And this white square tells me that my entire layer, my AI actions file 002, my subject here, the man in the yellow shirt, this square, this white square tells us that all of that information is turned on. Now, when I go to invert this mask, which makes it black, to fill the mask as black, or to brush on black over top of this white mask, the opposite effect will occur. And what that means is it will hide those parts or hide the image in correlation with what parts of this mask are black. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's just say this. I'm going to right click on my mask right here, and I'm going to set the entire mask as black. What will the result be in our image when I do this? What is the effect that I'm going to see? Given that no part of my image is going to be white. Randy, nice. Great. Marv, checkerboard, excellent. So CBP, all of you are right, but CBP is the most right. When I set this mask as black, my image disappears and it is replaced with the checkerboard, which tells me that there is no pixel information in that space. Okay, so let's tie this back to what we were talking a second ago. Earlier, when I took my image and I erased part of my image, right? When I erased to the right of my subject, that resulted in that checkerboard. And then we know, based on making that little blue square, that when I created a checkerboard image, and then I drew a little blue circle in the center of it, that information was preserved in a PNG format. So slowly we're tying these two concepts together. So if I set this mask as white, it will be white. If I set it as black, it will be turned off. So black means turned off, white means turned on in this case. Now, there's other considerations. For example, if I was to take my brush tool, okay, and I was to use this brush tool, and I make sure that the color, in this case, the foreground color of my brush tool, mimics that of the opposite, in this case, the negative or inversion of white, which is in this case black. If I brush on my image with that brush, you can see that the outside of my image here has now been erased, and what replaces it is a checkerboard. Again, super, super important information here. The difference, the principal difference between erasing my subject and creating a mask of my subject is huge. The effect is the same. The difference, however, is that masks are non-destructive in ACDSee files. Erasing is not. When I save this image as an ACDSee file, let's do it right now for fun. Example 2, when I save this as an ACDSee file, this mask is preserved, meaning that I can make changes to this image. So if I navigate away, going into another image, blah, 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 open up my film strip at a later date, decide that I want to edit my subject again, well after I've exited the image, one of the things that's relevant here, extremely relevant, is the fact that this mask contains information about my image, but importantly, the image is not erased, it is turned off. And I can turn it back on again by inverting that process. The process that I will invert in this case will be brushing on white rather than black. I'll stop here. This is very important. I want to make sure that this makes sense to everyone. Does this make sense so far? And again, for those of you that, this might be revision, but I just want to make sure this makes sense. So, awesome. One of the things that trips people up when it comes to the brush tool and masking is the following. Masks are not your image. I'm going to right click on my mask and let's leave it the same. When I brush on my mask using the white brush, right, it turns my image on again after being turned off in the specific areas. And when I go to use the black brush, it turns it off. Now, vice versa, if my image was, if my mask rather was set to black, when I use the white brush, it's going to turn that part of my image on. Now, really important here, your mask is not your image. Really, really important. Norman asks, is there any difference when you invert the mask and brush on the subject? Oh, well, yeah, hopefully that just showcased that. So if I invert the mask with the current brush strokes, Norman, what's going to happen is I'm going to just go down to the mask properties. I'm going to click on invert. And what it will do is it will create an opposite of the selected area. And one of the important things to note, as you can see here, is if we watch our mask, you can see that the mask itself is also inverted. So when I click on invert here, the center of our image is turned off. That correlates to the black that appears on our mask thumbnail here. You can see that the white is turned on, which correlates to the turned on aspect on our thumbnail, the white that appears right here. When I invert it, that is thusly inverted. So the black part is turned off and the white part is turned on. Norman, does that make sense how inverting your mask has an effect on the brush strokes? Awesome. Okay. The thing that trips people up is that they make an accidental selection of their image, not their mask. Now, hopefully everybody can see this, but you can see that when I select my image and then I go to select my mask, there's this little white wireframe that appears to the right of them. So as I do that, what appears is sort of it changes, the functions change about our image. So when we're selecting our actual image here, we lose the mask thumbnail properties, and then we click on the mask itself, those mask thumbnail properties pop up. Super important. So we know that when we brush on white, how do I hide this for now? Hide floating, there we go. If we know that if I brush on white, I make this part of my image appear, provided that I'm clicking on my mask. However, if I'm not clicking on my mask, if I just draw white on my subject, right, that's going to appear in the thumbnail that appears on the image because I'm no longer working on the mask. Now I'm just brushing on my image. So people can sometimes confuse operating on the wrong layer. So operating on the right layer, but rather the wrong part of the layer, which is the mask versus the subject on the actual image itself. So one of the considerations we want to make is we want to make sure that we're always interacting with our mask when we're concerned about making transparencies. Now, Doug asked a important question, and he asked, other apps do this step with AI, making it easy for beginners like me. Will ACDSee add this AI feature in the future? So we have a series of AI actions, and this is super relevant. This is what we're going to talk about right now because it makes the process of making masks very simple. So I'm going to remove my mask. To remove my mask, I'm going to click on the delete layer mask. And when I do that, I will be presented with our entire image devoid of any mask adjustments, which means it just becomes visible again. So we've been talking about making brush strokes over masks. So, and this is sort of a way of interacting with an image is to add just simply a mask on its own and manually engage with that mask. So when we make selections in ACDSee, okay, like for example, if I was to use the lasso selection tool, one that maybe many of you use very regularly, if I was to make a lasso selection here, everybody can see that. Hopefully they can see that little white and black line on my image. When I go to finalize that, I close the selection. This overlay pops up, this red overlay, and this overlay indicates to me what I have currently selected. Okay, this is my current selection. Now, really important. For those of you that are using ACDSee as by default, if you go to select and go to overlay options, what you might be seeing by default is this. You might be seeing marching ants. I personally can't stand marching ants. Hate it. So I always, whenever I open the software, I go to select overlay options and choose selection highlighted to represent my current and active selection. So when I have a current and active selection, like I've made with the lasso selection tool here, when I go to click on my mask, okay, when I add layer mask, it is going to be very sensitive as per my selection. So if I do that, I click on my subject here, you can see that the part of my image, based on the selection, the active selection I had, when I go to mask my image, clicking on the mask icon, now what happens is I'm presented with a mask that represents my selection. Does everybody see how my mask represents my selection in this case? Now we're starting to get to the more interesting and more complicated parts about this. So earlier, Doug asked a question and he asked, like, how do I make this an automated process? All I want to do is select the guy, okay? So AI actions represents automated common actions that we have that result in either a mask adjustment directly or an active selection. So if I was to click remove background, what it's going to do is it's going to remove the background for me. If I was going to select sky, for example, if I had a sky in my image, it'd do the best to select the sky in my image. This is a very common interaction for people who want to replace the sky in their image, or they want to do hue, levels, curves adjustment to their sky. However, the one that we're going to be talking about today is select subject. If I click on select subject, what's going to happen is my subject will be selected, right? So this is, again, that active selection, Doug, the same as the one that we were talking about with the lasso tool. And now when I go to click on the mask button, right, my subject is masked according to the select subject selection. So this is a quick and fast way to make a transparency of my subject. Now, earlier, I went ahead and actually made a PNG of my subject that contains this transparency, right? This exact transparency. And so what that effect might look like on another image, let's see if I can find him. Here he is. If I was to take just a random image, for example, this one right here, go to edit, and much the same way that I placed my blue circle in the center of my image here, I can click on add a file as a layer. I can make sure I'm selected my PNG with the subject and the background removed. And when I go to place that, there's my subject over top of my image. Heinous composition, but the point is that I was able to apply a transparency of this over top of my other image based on a selection I've made and a placement that I've made, okay? So I've gone ahead, selected my subject based on that AI selection method, made a mask, saved it as a PNG, and now I can place Guy wherever I want, right? He's just a part of this image now in the same way that my other subject is. Okay, so given what we know about PNGs, transparencies, how we can create them, okay? So just a quick three-part methodology, I guess, to creating transparencies. We talked about just straight up erasing our image and the effect that change had on our image, right? So erasing erases our image. However, note that erasing doesn't interact non-destructively with masks. And we can see right on our layer here that was a change to our image. Provided that I save this image, I can never get that part of my image back. Now, the other part is doing the process of selecting a part of our image using like select subject or one of the selection tools, aka magic wand, lasso, elliptical, rectangular, brush selection, and shape selection, and then creating a mask with that will also result in our subject being highlighted in this case, with the background being, in this case, hidden, right? And then the last thing we talked about is creating a custom mask. So adding a mask to our subject. and then going in with a brush tool over top of the mask and doing the opposite, in this case, the white, the black over top of the white part of my image will create a custom mask as well. So 3 methods. There's the destructive method using erase tool, non-destructive manual using the brush tool, and automated non-destructive using the select subject process. Okay, so let's just now apply this theory. Let's apply this method and make, I made a sort of a quick selection on this subject. So I made a selection on this subject. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a quick composition and showcase how this can sort of be used. And I want to take a time to illustrate how this composition can come into place if we actually take time and work on a composition. Now, the things that I'm going to be telling you, Alec Watson, in his exclusive workshop, I believe it's tomorrow, is going to be talking about these things in greater depth. So if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to the premium and you want more information on creating good compositions, I would suggest checking out that. But this workshop is absolutely foundational to the one that he's going to be talking about. 2 questions before we make this composition. First one, CBP asked, can these techniques be used with raw files? So no. Soft no for this. And the reason why is in edit mode, the mode that handles layers and masking. When you go to open up a raw file, what edit mode is going to interpret that raw file is it's going to interpret it as a very high resolution JPEG, I believe. It might also be a TIFF, but my point being is that in order to open up a raw file, what's going to have to happen is it's going to need to make a conversion process in order to engage with it in edit mode. And then that raw file is now actually a JPEG file for the purpose of your editing. So the answer to your question is a soft no, in the sense that, yeah, you can open up a raw file, but it's immediately going to be compressed into a different file format. Why? So raw files are not actually editable. And the reason why is because they're proprietary files that belong to the company that makes the camera that you're editing. So Canon doesn't give ACDSee nor Adobe nor any company access to proprietary information to actually engage with that file directly. So what companies like ACDSee have to do is they have to engage with that file in 2 ways. They need to make a compression, or they need to create a sidecar file. In develop mode will create a sidecar file, and that sidecar file will contain your edits. When you go to open up that raw image, what it's going to do is ACDSee is going to reference that sidecar file, and that's where ACDSee saves the changes that you've made to the raw file. ACDSee doesn't save changes to the raw file itself. Merely it like correlates the two and showcases the changes that you've made in the sidecar file. Then when you want to save your raw file, you actually have to compress it. In essence, you have to save it as a different file format. The difference between develop and edit mode is that edit does that compression process right at the beginning in order for you to make edits at all. Now, CBP, does that make sense? That's a complicated question that hopefully I've answered as best I can. Let me know. While you let me know, I'm going to go on to Randy's question. Okay, hopefully, I'm glad that answered 2 people's questions. Randy, can you adjust the selection that the AI does if it does a bad job? Yeah, in fact, actually, that's a great point. You can. It is a big watch. It's a nice watch. If I go to select subject here on my, so Randy, I've made a selection already. I did this because sometimes selections aren't perfect. When I go to select and I go to load selection, I've made this selection and I've just titled it 1. And that's the selection that you can see. So this is the selection that I've made previously. Now, if I go to select subject on this image here, it might not do a perfect job. Yeah. And in fact, actually, there's a little bit of an edge here that I need to add. It's still an automated process. So what I would need to do is I would need to add to the selection like I had previously. Let me showcase how that works. Selections that are active, okay, can be added to. So if I go to the brush selection tool, okay, when I go to draw on here, you can see that I'm actually just simply adding to the selection. Do you see that, Randy? Hopefully you can see how I'm just adding more red to my subject here. Okay, now there is a slight difference for other modes. So if I was to click on the shape selection tool, very, very important, okay? I wanna make sure that I have add to selection selected, and you know it's selected because it's blue. But basically what that does is when I go to make a selection using a different selection method, when I go to add that part of my selection, what it's going to do is, oops, come on, what's going on here? That's odd. Why is it not? Oh, I have to click commit. That's why I'm a doofus. So when I go to add that part of my selection on there, it's henceforth added to my active selection. The difference being if I did minus from selection, if I had that turned on by accident, when I go to make a selection like this, you can see that I have removed that part of my selection. And more embarrassingly, if I clicked on new selection, for example, and I tried to add that back, oops, new selection, there we go. There we go. If I go to create a new selection here, didn't mean to do that. What happens is it replaces the one that I accidentally, or replaces, there we go. It replaces the active selection I have. So all you need to know, Randy, is if you're using the brush tool, that's not a problem. If you're using one of these other selection tools, just make sure to click the plus button to continue to add to whatever existing automated selection you've had. Does that answer your question, Randy? Just make sure that you have that plus selected and it will add to the selection that you've already added. Chris asked, are past webinars available for viewing in the community website, or is a premium membership required? The free ones should be available on the free section of the community site, and the premium ones, I believe, are available in the premium section. However, all of the past ones. However, I do need to follow up on that. I'm not certain the current state of it. I'm not, don't exactly handle that myself. That's another person in the marketing team that handles that. But if you email me, Chris, I can get you a proper answer about that. But that is 90% sure that I'm pretty sure the free are available to the in the free video section, and the exclusive are available in the exclusive section. And then also what Kai had mentioned is that the free ones are available on YouTube. So you can find all of the past free workshops, like this one will be uploaded to YouTube, but the premium ones, I believe, are locked to premium members. Premium is not required to view past webinars that were available freely. Does that make sense, Chris? Good question. Okay, let's get back to it. So we want to make a composition. We're going to use a PNG to do it. Here we have our subject. Like I said, I've already made a selection of the subject just to expedite things, as you can see here. Okay. One of the things to note here is that when we go to add a PNG to an image, sometimes selections add a bit of a white halo, especially when the instances like this that have a solid white background. So what I often do is I go to, once I've made an active selection, I go and I refine that active selection. And what I can do by refining it is I can actually change the relationship of where the edge of the selection is. And actually, maybe I should slow down and just show that once again. This is a really useful tool. I have a selection. In this case, I clicked on select subject, or I made a selection with my brush selection tool. Click on select, click on refine. And when in refine, I have the ability to reduce, in this case, shift the edge negatively, And that will create, it will actually remove that halo that might appear on my image here. So as you can see, if I zoom in, you can see that there's about a 15% pixel that was removed. I could have done -10 there. It's a bit harsh, but either way, the point is that it's gone in and I've sort of lowered this. And by lowering this, one of the benefits of this is I don't get that harsh white that appears. Okay, so I'm going to mask my guy. There's my masked guy. And let's go ahead and save this as a PNG image. So I'm going to save as, I'll save this as a PNG file. And then let's call it, yeah, AI Actions 11 PNG is fine. And then what's going to happen is it's going to save this as a PNG. And then what I can do is I can open up a scene. So I have this scene here. This is useful. I'm going to open up this scene. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick composition using our subject here. So we're going to add our subject to our image, and we're going to justify his existence within this image in a sense. And what I mean is we're going to add lighting changes that sort of make him fit in better. So I'm going to click on the add a file as a layer. Once again, I'm going to navigate to my subject that I've created. Remember, this is my AI Actions file, and then this is the PNG that I created of my subject. And I'm going to place him in my image. I'm going to place him over top of my image here. We'll resize him about yay. Place him in the foreground of my image, about, it's still pretty big, about yay. What I'm going to do also is I'm going to reduce the size of my image overall. So I'm going to tuck this in, and I'm going to tuck this up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a levels adjustment on my AI Actions layer. So this layer right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up levels. And what I want to do is I want to get his shirt closer to a black, maybe a true black that we would see in the background here, because as it is right now, his shirt is a bit yellow. So if I pull the midtones, so if I pull the midtones in, you can see that it's affecting everything on my image here. So what I want to make sure I do is I want to make sure that I clip this adjustments level, this level 1 here, to the layer that exists directly beneath it. So in this case, when I clip my levels adjustment, it is applied to my PNG layer that I just created. So then I can increase I can darken the black to about there, which feels like it fits better. And I'll just pull the whites back slightly. The other thing we can do is we should add a I think what we should add, sorry, is a selection or a little bit of a white above my layer here that sort of fits with my subject. I think what I would like to do is I would like to make a sort of like a white light that appears over top of my subject, sort of around the shoulders and around the face area. And the reason why is because this room would have overhead lighting. In fact, it does. So let's just be mindful of that and try to create a circumstance with that degree of light here. What we might want to do is let's see if we can create a quick selection of our subject here. Now that he exists on the space, there we go. So I've just used the select subject tool. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this layer here, this blank layer that I've created. This blank layer was created simply by adding a blank layer. Let's just do it again for fun. So I'll just click on this icon right here. And then what I want to do is I want to actually use a white brush, and I'm going to increase the feathering, and I'm going to lower the opacity significantly, and I'm just going to brush within the selection. Let's see how this looks. Hopefully it looks something like this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a blend mode So I'm going to select overlay, and I'm going to lower the opacity of the overlay. And all this really does is it gives, I'm going to lower this slightly a bit more there. It gives a little bit of a, it gives a little bit of a highlight to the top of my figure here, which maybe mimics that of an overhead lighting that we would see in a space like this. Rick just asked, what did you just turn on? Rick, can you, did you mean in regards to the selection that I created? Or do you mean in regards to the overlay effect that I just added to this layer? I can explain both. I just need to know which one you refer to. The other thing I could do is just go back and do the whole thing. Overlay. Okay. So, with all layers, there's two ways to have layers impact essentially all layers that exist beneath them, right? So in this case, if I was to just go, let's just do this by adding a blank layer, and I'll quickly mention this using red. I'm going to fill this blank layer, Rick, with red. Okay. Hopefully you can see that. Hopefully everyone can see that. What I'm going to do here is when I lower opacity on this red, you can see that the pixels, right, are going to be affecting the layers that exist beneath them. In the case of my red layer here, 50% of the pixels in this red layer are visible, and 50% of those pixels are invisible. And what that means is that those invisible pixels are then going to be referring to images that exist beneath them. So that gives us this red effect over top of our image, as you can see. Rick, does that make sense so far? I'm going to talk about overlay in a second here. I just want to make sure that that opacity function makes sense. Red layer, 50% of the pixels are opaque, 50% of the pixels are fully transparent, which reveals the images that exist beneath it. Rick, does that make sense? This is actually really cool. Function of ACDSee is blending in general. Okay, I'm not getting an answer, so I'm going to keep moving on. So overlay changes the relationship of this layer to the layers beneath it in a way that's similar to that of opacity, but it has differing effects because there's a variety of different blend modes, and they all do different things in relation to the way that they interpret those pixels that appear on the layer and the layers that exist beneath them. Now, I don't have time nor actually the knowledge to isolate each and every single one of these blend modes and talk about what they do. So rather than do that, I'm just going to visually scroll down and sort of showcase the ways in which these layers affect light on our image. Excuse me. The overlay function basically creates a situation where it's going to subtly blend the layer one that we had earlier, blend this layer in with our image in a way that sort of highlights and gives a good light in this area, while still, not supplanting it entirely. For example, the difference between a layer that has blend mode, in this case, and a layer that doesn't have blend mode is this. So our copy here contains basically harder opacities and no functional blend, which means that it appears as just a faded white in this case. Versus our layer one here, which has an opacity and an overlay effect, which lowers the effect of this highlight. Okay, so let's talk about two more things we can do to this image. One of the things we can do to this image is we can just make a duplication of the background layer. And then what we're going to do with this duplication is we're going to rename it. And I'm going to call this blur, because if we have a new subject in our image, it makes sense that parts of our image that exist behind our subject are are actually are actually worth blurring. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the topmost portion of my image here. And I'm going to, once with that active selection, I'm going to click on blur. And then blur, as you can see, changes that, that relationship on our image. So what we can do here is we can click on the mask. Note that when I've created a adjustment layer, they come preset with masks in the same way that my levels adjustment does. So if I click on my mask here and I increase the feathering on my mask, that's going to basically create a soft or rather than harder line that appears at the bottom. Hopefully everyone can see how soft or in this case, hard that appears. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to actually adjust the blur. I don't want it to be that strong. That's way too strong. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this blur. And what we're going to do is we're going to add to it in the same way that we talked about adding to selections earlier. Oops, did not mean to move that. There we go. I'm going to take a brush tool with lowered opacity. I'm going to make sure that the foreground is set to white. And then I'm just going to softly blur. And what that does is if we look at our layer mask, it's adding further white to that part of my my image there. As you can see, we're sort of softly blurring in the background. Now, if I thought this effect was still too strong, I could run a slight opacity over top of it, and that would give us a lowered opacity on our image here with the blur. And I think that looks a little bit better there. Larry asked, how do you select part of our image? Well, just because I wanted to make a selection of half of my image in this case, Larry, what I did is I went to the rectangular selection and just made a selection over my image of a part of my image. And as you can see, that creates a selection that in this case has an effect on half of my image. Now, if I selected half my image here, and just to give you an idea, I wanted to, let's see, split tone half of my image. Well, you can see that that would have an effect on half of the image if I added this adjustment effect. Does that make sense, Larry? The only thing I did there was just add an active rectangular selection and then click on an adjustment layer. Let me know if that makes sense. As for, okay, I'm glad that it helps there. As for Kai, who I think is helping Rick on his question here, he says, I think Rick was asking about that lighting layer came about. Okay, so the lighting layer, the layer one, the layer we added here, it's a three-step process. We added a blank layer. So there's our layer right there. We selected our AI actions layer right here. Hopefully everybody can see that. And then all we did is we used select subject over top of that layer. And then what it does is it adds a active selection of the circumference of my subject. With that circumference active, what I did is I clicked on the layer 2. This is the layer that we're going to add the light into. And then all I did here was click on a brush tool with a lowered opacity and a really high feathering. And then all I'm going to do is with the active selection, as long as I have an active selection, when I brush with an active selection, the brush strokes will be placed inside of the active selection. So if I do some brush strokes here, actually to highlight this, what I might do is let's just do blue so you can see this better. If I just do blue, I did it inside my, so you can see that even if I go outside the edge of my selection, it doesn't have an effect because we have this active selection confining where the brush strokes will end up. So when I go to deselect, you can see the effect of that that spot. So all I did, the difference here is I did it with white. And now what I can do is I can lower the opacity on this layer and add a blend mode like the one I did earlier, which is overlay, or I could do multiply or, screen if I wanted to, and that's going to have an effect on the layer. Kai, does that make sense? Hopefully that answers your and Rick's question. 3-step process: add a new layer, make a selection of an existing layer, in this case, the AI actions layer, fill it with white brush strokes. Then I guess we lowered the opacity. It did clarify. Yeah, awesome. Cool. So the one last thing, okay, so let's just do a quick recap on what we've done on this image and what we've talked about in the workshop. Basically, we spent a good portion of today talking about the significance of transparencies. So transparency allows us to control what our image looks like. It has real practical effect on many projects in our lives. Like in this case, I gave the examples of working with logos as a graphic designer. But it also gives us the ability to save these PNG files that are isolated parts of our images. We've made really good selections, and I want to save them and I want to incorporate them into compositions. This is how I do that. This is one of the ways in which I do that. We've then talked about sort of like different strategies. We talked about, manual masking with the brush tool. We talked about erasing destructively. We talked about using AI selections to sort of make selections of our image. And then with those skills in mind, we did that style of selection. We made an AI selection of a subject, in this case, our subject right here. And then what we've done is we've saved a PNG of that image. We've applied that PNG to our image. And now we're creating a whole composition based on an image that isn't found in this composition. So we've created a situation that is representative of a whole new image. Like we're creating art in this case. This is what they call photographic art. And maybe the last thing I'll add to this layer is I'd add something like a photo effect. And photo effects are really useful at just creating a sort of a homogenized look over our image. What I would do is I would add a photo effect, and then I would dramatically reduce the opacity on that photo effect. And that photo effect, when applied at the very top of my image, will then affect every single layer that exists beneath our image. And that sort of cinches up our image and finalizes the process. So let's just do a quick review of what we've talked about for this particular image. So we went ahead and just added this background. So the background is what we've been working with. Then what we did is we added our subject over top of our background, and we resized our subject. We applied a levels adjustment to make sure that our subject sort of matches and fits in with the background, sort of from a black perspective. We want to make sure that his sweatshirt matches the black, or at least vaguely matches the black in our image, rather than feeling like kind of dissonant from it. So we've added a levels adjustment. We adjusted that, and then we just made sure that that levels adjustment was applied to just the subject. And we do that by clicking on this little diamond icon here to clip it to the subject beneath. Really important little quick tip and tool there. The thing we did next is we made a selection of our subject here by using our PNG layer and select subject to create a new sort of layer. And in this layer, we just added a bit of overhead lighting to our subject to, again, make him fit and justify his existence in this image. We've then gone ahead and then we've made it a slight blur in the background here. As you can see, we did that by using a rectangular selection and then just a bit of feathering on that. And then we added a little bit more of a rounded corner at the bottom here with the edge of our blur, just so it fit in a little bit better. Purpose of the blur here, really to just, again, make our subject fit in this and feel like he's the focal point of our image rather than flatly a part of the background. And then the very last thing we did is we added a photo effect to sort of just make a homogenization, to sort of make everything justified flatly over top all of our layers that include both of our background layer, in this case, the background of the coffee shop here, and then our subject with the toque. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm just going to open up just straight for questions now. This covers everything I wanted to cover in this. Yeah, Norm, I don't ever really use a pen. I have lots of friends that use pen tablets when they illustrate, but not so much for ACDC. Norman, you're welcome. Just a reminder too, just a quick promo reminder, quick advertisement. If you don't have access to the premium workshops, our exclusive workshops, it's $7 a month. It contains 3 exclusive workshops done myself, Rodrigo, and Alec Watson, and gives you access to all previous workshops that were done exclusively, and gives you access to Alec's courses. Those are photography courses designed for intermediate photographic professionals. So check it out. Thank you, CBP. I'm glad that helps out. Again, I think a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in this workshop adds new layers of complexity and sort of a lot of really useful stuff for Alec's composition workshops that are coming up next month, creating justifiable compositions, adding multiple images together and sort of making them work together in harmony rather than feeling like they clash so much. Also, please check out my next workshop. I'm really passionate about it. It's on print ready images and sort of common print ready sizes. I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about printing is something called bleed. And so if you are interested in sending your images at some point to a printer, or you're interested in using a professional print shop, please check out that exclusive workshop. There's going to be some really useful stuff talked about in that. So pardon me. Okay, let's Dave, you're most welcome. Rick, thank you so much. Sonia, thank you. Norm, thank you so much. Norman, how do you subscribe to premium channel? I think you just click on the premium tab. Let's see here. Let's just log in real quick. I think you just go to where it says premium plan and then you unlock it by subscribing right here. So as long as you're in, you should be able to see premium plan and then subscribe right there. Hey, thank you, Larry. You're most welcome. Thank you, Alex. Awesome. Anthony, I'm going to try to post this video today. I'll try to have it uploaded on our YouTube channel. It does need to be edited just because there's a lot of header and footer that I need to get rid of, but I will try to get it up today. Richard, thank you. Greg, thank you so much. Kai, thank you. I'm glad that the filled in information helped. Thanks for asking questions. John, thank you so much. And thank you, Colleen. Awesome. Hopefully this was helpful to everybody. And again, this is just this kind of thing and more with our exclusive workshops. We go into a little bit more specified detail in some of our exclusive workshops. And then the free workshops can talk about a lot of things, but they end up being a bit more generalized. Thank you, Norman. Awesome. Also, once again, I try to answer emails as often as I can, but if you email me at aprice@acdsystems.com, if you don't hear back from me, there's also a tab in the community page for asking questions as well. I think it's literally called workshop questions, editing questions, free workshops. Well, somewhere around here. Anyway, so either email me or check that out. Bob, you're welcome. Dick, you're most welcome. I'm going to mute my mic unless there's any questions, some pressing questions anyone has. Yeah. Otherwise, thank you so much. If there's any questions that pop up, I'll just unmute my mic, but I could just really use a sip of water and to quit talking. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone participating. I will see you next time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.